academic medical centers. Though people don't like the government that much, they like the FDA and the NIH. You start going a little bit lower, and you start getting to websites and organizations devoted to certain diseases. And then you start going a little bit lower, you get down to the Google world. And you know, as you mentioned, people look up stuff. They just don't trust the information they get online. They actually bring it to a more trusted source. Unfortunately, at the bottom of the list, the people that least trust of all, right? You have pharma, the employers, and the payers. And right now, those are the three groups that are giving people most of their health information. And in this industry, we're in an interesting place where we have industry driving innovation directly to consumers. And what I think will be interesting to see is where this plays out and how well people trust the result relative to, you know, is this going to be in the pharma realm, life sciences realm, or is this going to be in the sort of the disease-specific website devoted community building, patients like me type of area. And I think we're at risk as an industry of losing sight of that and going the wrong direction.
That's really helpful. I wanted to ask you, and first of all, I wanted to acknowledge that the Zappos gravitational force that you brought you to Las Vegas seems like it's a good thing. Isn't that the hub of entertainment?
Yeah. There's Carrot Top.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was thinking, move over, Dana Carvey. Have you done a stand-up act there in Las Vegas yet?
Dana Carvey has horrible 3-vessel coronary disease. I'm not sure I want to step into those shoes, but yeah, it's almost a thought. Actually, these shoes I got on discount at Zappos. 25% off.
Yeah.
So I just feel like I should follow up. I've never been on a platform with someone who has comedic talent, gifts. So it occurred to me I should share this with you. I did my own evolutionary experiment here 30 years ago at Scripps. I was a postdoc in developmental biology, and for kicks I took a neuroscience class, and we had to study lateral inhibition in the horseshoe crab eye. It was this famous experiment, and they were kept here, except that the horseshoe crabs were slowly disappearing. And in the next tank over were lobsters that people were working on here. There was a little channel for the water to flow between, and sure enough, there was a little competitive thing going on between the lobsters and the horseshoe crabs. And I can tell you that at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, the lobsters clearly have an evolutionary advantage, ate all of the horseshoe crabs. I hope that helps with whatever message you were trying to communicate.
I still think someone was one up on me comment on the wall. But I did have a serious question before we get to Jennifer and Hawken and others, and that is, I think it's phenomenal that you've assembled your electronic medical record. It's one of the first in the world to bring in all this other data. And is that because you don't have the constraints of the Epic server and all this other stuff? Because you're basically got fluidity, you're doing it yourself?
So I think that the reason that, and I should mention our partners in this are Iora Health, they're a startup out of Cambridge, they're the ones building the CMR. And the thing is, they built it because they realized that the Epics and the Cerners weren't doing what they needed. The jobs they needed to be done had to be created from scratch. So yes, there's that flexibility, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword because you have to build it, it's complicated, and then it's proprietary, and then how do you share it with other people? So you have to build it to try to be as open source as possible. It's a bit of a challenge. But that's the idea, is that if you build it to the task, and if the task is not building insurance, then it can actually function quite well.
And one last thing, because I can't resist with Michael here. You spent time in China. You met all the people, the top dogs at VGI. You wrote the article, and can you just give us a thumbnail as where is China going with genomics?
Crimea. There's been a lot said about BGI and this intelligence testing stuff. I wrote about it a bit, and they're doing that. I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, where sort of the genetics intelligence are going to be to the point where we're going to select them in embryo. But it's not going to be a long time till there are important traits that you can select. And China is throwing money at it like crazy. They have a 50-year plan, like a full outfit. We don't even have a 3-week plan. And so, it's a question that they spend the money and they care. And yes, it is true that their government is a little difficult, but that could become a terrible problem. But the bigger problem is that they're actually doing the goddamn and stuff, and we're having trouble doing it because our government doesn't care.
Yeah, well, that's really insightful, and now turn over to Jennifer.
I have a question about 23andMe, and I applaud your efforts to educate on a broad level population. I think you have a tremendous opportunity to do that because of your audience. And my question reflects more education on the individual health level for someone who is seeking information about themselves. I'm a clinician, so I do pre- and post-test counseling, and I find that not only do well-educated people often not understand genetics, but they don't understand probability or the limitations of testing. And so I wonder how you, in returning results, at least before the FDA stepped in, how you educate about probabilistic results, odds ratios, and also how you safeguard against false reassurance. So, for example, with the BRCA, how you, as someone who has a positive family history and a negative result and might assume that they've ruled out mutation. So just wonder what the steps are in education in that kind of circumstance.
Sure. So for one thing, we've created a number of different modules specifically about risk. So I think there's definitely educational materials that we point people to understand about risk. And I think, as was shown in the last talk, we got a lot of feedback from genetic counselors about how do they present risk, and that's where the little people came from, where they said, like, showing, okay, this is what is average for the population, this is what yours is, because that really conveys the idea that, okay, you have a greater risk of it, but look at those, 13 people in your case that don't have it. So it's not deterministic, and I think that's something that has been really important message for us to convey. One of the things that is, when you talk about your last point in terms of the VRCA, we're very clear in that in the messaging, and we have a lot of context around it saying this is only the 3 mutations. So it is not for everybody, and I think that's one of the things that it's a big concern. We want to make sure that people understand that. The same way I remember when I was pregnant, and I got my tests, and I got my cystic fibrosis test, and the doctor told me, like, yeah, you don't carry anything. And then I said, like, you're wrong. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, you're wrong. If you can't tell me that I don't carry anything, you can just tell me that I dramatically lowered my risk, but you didn't eliminate those odds. So I actually think that we'll be able to improve on it. I understand the importance. There's a real importance of having the physician interaction. And I think it's really, like, it's our job to be able to keep iterating, and I believe that we can make this information communicable to the average individual so they can walk into a physician and at least have an intelligent conversation. We are talking about doing more video modules, so more information, so that if, before you got your carrier status, you'd watchable video about that, and what does that mean? So I think there's a real potential to educate people about this, and we've seen that. I think that's where a lot of the studies have come back, that people can understand this information.
I just want to quickly add this. I've done 23andMe and stuff, and I think they do a fantastic job. But there's a bigger problem, a much bigger problem, is that nobody understands probability, and nobody, if you tell someone that they have like a much greater chance of having celiac than their neighbor, whoa, that could be like 2% instead of 1%, that's twice as much. And so people are not educated at the high school level and all the way down, and my dad had Alzheimer's, so I had an APOE test, and I'm telling you this because I have neither allele, and so I called my doctor, who was really smart, and I said, I dodged that bullet. He said, yeah, but it's a bullet out of a machine gun, because that's just one way you can get Alzheimer's. And I don't talk to that guy anymore. No, but he's right. Most doctors don't think probabilistically because most people don't.
Yeah.
And so no matter how good Anne's stuff is, if people just see that they have a greater risk without any idea that it's a numerator and a denominator, the numbers, I just think every person in America should be forced to take statistics.
And get your exome sequence, right? Yeah.
That's why I'm happy you have the option of wet earwax or dry earwax. It's very simple. I was wet.
So and you have this enormous database with 600,000 samples, and you said hundreds of traits. and you're reporting on heritability and risk and drug response, but there is like a whole another dimension that you could be reporting on from this data. It's a copy of the virus, and maybe it's a much greater impact in terms of 22q, 16p, and 15q, and so on. So is this something that you can possibly revisit and analyze for the entire data set and report back, or was there a specific decision not to get into this area? It was certainly very, very important for neurodevelopmental disorders and psychiatric disorders.
Yeah, so I think the way I've approached this is we can't do everything all at once. So the most valuable thing is for us to say we're starting with a reliable technology where we feel comfortable reporting information back. And just getting people educated with that and growing and understanding how people are going to understand that. But at some point, we will certainly add on, whole genome, CNVs, microbiome. I mean, you can imagine that as the technologies become robust, these people want to learn more and more about themselves, and as we already have them engaged, if we can start to offer them that, then we'll build a more robust database for research. So I think we certainly are interested in that. It's just that we've already bitten off a lot to manage. And so over time, I would hope that we would do more and more. So at some point.
And what's the next largest resource of genomic data after your 650,000? That not the ones that are talking about growing, but that exist today.
I mean, Amgen, or Decode
Decode
is certainly.
Okay.
It's hard. I mean, I haven't followed it, but there's no other one that's really significant. I mean, close even in size.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else can point to one that is.
It must be Decode. And then we know about the Decode that they had, how many actual Icelandics were GWAS?
So Decode has maybe about 120,000 plus, but they have some collaborations published before.
Right. So through the international collaboration. Right. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to ask a broad question about data collection. As we're moving data collection closer to the consumer, be it through services like 23andMe or patient editable health records or wearables or any of that, how do the panel see that we should weight that data as we integrate it into the already existing, I hesitate to use the word more robust, the clinical data that we already have?
So glad you asked that question. Patient-generated data. Let me turn it to Harry. I got a couple other people who want to answer.
So it's a fascinating area because we have a couple of different pieces of information. One, so for example, my bike computer will track my heart rate based upon my GPS coordinates, which is awesome. But does my doctor want to see that? No. Right? Because the accuracy of this is way off. If I go sailing, it looks like I've exercised all day. I put on my dog, same thing. So we have this belief that we're going to monitor people and check stuff, and we forget that where you go and what you do is so critically important. In depression, as an example, if you track someone's cell phone who has a history of depression, and you watch the geodynamics of that person, they start going to narrow and narrower radiuses of locales, and eventually they stop leaving their house. And you can see this progression. Also the way they talk, the way they use their phone, how much they talk versus how much text, how much they have direct interaction with people also changes. So there's all these kind of signs that we have about people's behavior, which is not what you're talking about, a patient-generated, patient-reported stuff. We have this data, we're just not tapping into that. Now the quality is very suspect in live areas. So when I go to the supermarket and I'm buying kale and frozen French fries, it doesn't say who ate them. It gives me a sense of what's going on. And so we can start harnessing those types of information, and we can start getting better sense of it. And even with my heart rate monitor, if we gave people the analytics to show that, your heart rate is 170 for 5 minutes. Pretty good. I didn't die, right? On a steep hill. Now, if my heart rate is 170 on flat terrain, right, it's probably pretty bad. And that should trigger something that we know. So we have to find a way of how do we let people collect data, understanding in a meaningful way, and get that to someone who can be helpful. At the same time, use information that we haven't used in the past, which is probably very accurate and very specific to individuals in a
generally diss the fact that consumers could enter their own phenotypic data accurately. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I would say in the early days, self-reported data was one of the challenges that we came up to over and over again. And we would point to things like Framingham, where there's a lot of great research that's come from that, and that's all self-reported. That's sort of queries. In the UK, there's tons of these studies that come in, and there are a lot of just self-reported surveys that come in. So we did a study that where we actually looked at all the various studies, all the various genetic associations that we could replicate. And there's some things that are very easy. If I ask someone if you've had cancer, people can report on that relatively well, whether or not they've had cancer. There's certain diagnoses that are potentially more complicated, like celiac disease was actually one that was more complicated. We couldn't just ask, do you have celiac? We had to actually had you ever had a biopsy for that? And that's when we were able to replicate those results. So self-reported data, it's part of, again, being a web-based company. We can iterate on those questions. But we found it's an incredibly accurate way of collecting data. And in fact, now when we have actually gone and we've done a couple of projects now, pulling in medical records, we've really been challenged by actually getting the correct information. The accuracy there has actually been much more of a challenge for us. So having that self-reported, it's not going to be able to do everything, but it's a phenomenal tool that I think actually would really complement a medical record.
And Russ, we know patients have a real problem understanding drug reactions. Well, how would you put that into the whole story?
Yeah, so if I could just add on one thing to Anne's last comment, there's actually also been a paper of a group using electronic medical record out of Vanderbilt trying to replicate, and I do an annual review of the literature, and one year I presented the 23andMe, and I said, isn't that great how they can replicate, and then I showed the one from the EMR, and the amount of replication and the quality of the replication was very comparable. So I just want to underscore that electronic medical records are very valuable, but they have the same, doctors have the same problems collecting accurate data as patients do, and patients often care a lot more. So I'm a big fan of not underestimating the power of patient-provided data. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I could ask questions, even though I wasn't an advisor to 23andMe, but we've never done a study, but thinking about how we could get at some of the really funky drug-related phenotypes, because some of them are like, well, did you happen to measure your serum drug levels during that episode? And of course the answer is no. So then there's this very fun little puzzle about how would you set up the phenotypic questions for drug, and some of them have been done. How would you set up others for that? And I think that that's worth a lot of thinking, because this is the future of trials for a variety of reasons having to do with the federal government's budget and other reasons, that these trials in the wild and with patient-provided phenotypes. And so I have a sense of urgency to come up with such phenotypes.
Yeah. Let's turn over to Kim.
Hi, I'm the end user of all you guys' work, and I just want to thank you so much. I have learned so much this conference. But when I wrote my paper, I was siloed. I was very much alone. I was at the tip of Baja in a small little rural fishing village, just Googling away and doing all my research. And my paper is called The Recapitulation of a Disease Process from a Patient's Perspective, a Search for a Unifying Field Theory. And I just wanted to say that it's kind of ironic you're talking about patient data and getting that data back. I tried to find somebody who could write a case report, because I knew I had a novel phenotype-phenotype correlation, and I wanted to get that in public domain, and I've had a very difficult time. I had a physician, Michael Ackerman, who's quite well-known in heritable cardiomyopathy. However, he was very excited when he first found out about my case, but then I got kind of sidelined. He's a very busy man, and it really wasn't until Eric Topol took a little interest and said he would do it if Ackerman wouldn't do it. And when I challenged him, I said, I just want to be politically correct here. Do you want to do it? Because I have this other physician, Eric Topol, who would do it. And man, he jumped on it so fast.
Funny how that paper got submitted right away.
Well, not only did it get submitted, it got accepted at the HRS conference, the sessions. I am second. I'm a co-author on it, and I think we discussed it on stage. I said the ironic thing is I can't get into the conference because I don't have credentials. But anyway, I did in my writing, the future of medicine, and all the problems and all the exciting things that I saw with the it's quantum theory. It's probabilistic, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, when Michael was pointing out that a lot of the public doesn't understand probabilistic, he wasn't referring to you.
and I think my paper turned out to be a challenge to the diagnostic policy, the traditional diagnostic policy. And you guys have done what I was saying we need to do, and to be here and hear what all you people are doing and actually making it happen and turning it into real time, usable, practical use. I just want to thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for inviting me.
Sure, you're always welcome here, that's for sure. We'll have the last question.
Thanks, Eric. I guess this question is mainly for Anne. I wondered whether, two things, what unexpected and interesting things may have fallen out from your data? And second, and relatedly, have you considered putting your data together with any other major databases? There was an article by Malcolm Gladwell in the New Yorker. I think it was about what was funky about the SATs, but anyway, he focused on the largest database of human questions that were answered by individuals times number of questions, and that was Match.com. And he commented on a couple of the interesting findings. The most interesting thing he found was that in order to predict whether a woman would sleep with a man on the first date, the most important fact was whether she ordered a beer at that date. Strange stuff falls out. So I was wondering whether the combination of databases is something you consider, and secondly, unusual things that have fallen out.
So it's a great question. I love someone mentioned it earlier, the Target article of, the pregnancy. So Target was able to identify this teenage girl who was pregnant based on sort of identifying all their patterns. And I think what I see as really exciting that's going on now is this trend of sort of the consumerization of healthcare, that you are actually going to be empowered to control your data. And if 23andMe becomes that repository, a trusted source where you could start putting in all this data, your shopping behavior, it's fascinating to me that Walgreens, Walmart, Safeway are all going to put physicians in their stores. So you're going to start merging shopping data with some of the physician information. You can imagine that could be combined with genetic information. So I think that there's a tremendous number of interesting tidbits that you'll find. We've started to do some studies, like our most popular paper is the breast size, breast cancer. So it's sort of intuitive to some people in this crowd, but people who have larger breasts are higher risk for breast cancer. So those are some of the things, like that hit all the porn sites, et cetera. Like that was a very popular paper. So those are some of the more surprising things. Some of the interesting things that have fallen out, to me, one of the most interesting, which is actually clinically relevant, is that we can detect white blood cells in your saliva. And we can actually detect individuals who have the JAK2 mutation and thus are typically have a myeloproliferative neoplasm. And so what's interesting is we have a bunch of individuals then who have that JAK2 mutation but have not reported that they have it. So that's a kind of an interesting study. We never predicted that we'd find that, but we actually start to see a number of chromosomal abnormalities that correlate with age. And so there's some things like that I think we never would have, we have a small research arm that just does sort of very experimental research. Things like that I think will actually end up being very useful at some point, and we'll do that. We're doing some of that follow-up work now, but those types of things we never would have expected to find. So, yeah.
One quick point about Match.com is one of the reasons they're successful is that they compare what you say to what you do. So for example, if I were to create a profile on Match.com, which I have not done, I might say that to make myself look classy, that I like long walks on the beach and going to the opera. But if you go through my credit card history, you'll see the last 30 years I've never purchased an opera ticket. And what Match.com does is it actually looks at your behavior, what you've reported, and what actually is successful. So no matter what you say you're looking for, they actually have, the algorithms are based on what's been successful, right, based upon your past behavior and other sorts of things like that. And so healthcare is the same kind of thing. If we can take the information that we have, that we report, we can contrast it with information that we get from other resources. And it's often in the disparities between those pieces that we actually can also get some very useful information. That you do not have to do, but you actually, it tracks where you do what you've done on your dates. It's I love going to the opera, and you've never said there was never a date at the opera, things like that. But they're able to look at those disparities and also figure out if what you say and what you've done are way off, right? They try to bring you back down to earth.
Yeah. And speaking of, when Dr. Adler brought up the Malcolm Gladwell, I had intended to explore with David Epstein, I don't know if he's here, but about the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour thing with him, because there was a lot of stuff going on there, so maybe we can do that over at the reception. It'll be fun. All right, I think what we want to do now is say a lot of thanks, not just to the panelists here. That was a great closing session, not just entertaining, but highly educational. There's a few other people I want to thank. Corinne Yarborough, who's been out front with the whole crew. I can't even tell you how many hundreds, if not 1,000 hours she put into this program to help all the logistics. And Charles and his whole crew on the AV side, really appreciate all of them. And all of you who's hanging there with us and finishing up number 7. And we got hopefully a nice sunset and celebration outside. So thanks for being here and appreciate it.